apologies. I'm reading this off my phone. I printed it out this morning, and then I realized I only brought page 1. So that'll lead us in. This is an excerpt from an essay that I wrote for Granta, and if you want to hear the rest of it, it's up on their website or on my website, apricotirving.com. So my dad, I wrote a lot about him in my book, The Gospel of Trees, and he was fine with all of the story being told, the betrayals, the disappointments, the failures of being missionaries to Haiti. But when I wrote this essay, this was really hard. He was fine with me writing about the way that his anger impacted my childhood, but when I wrote about how his anger impacted my his grandson's childhood, that was a lot trickier territory. So he asked, we had a conversation last year on Valentine's Day, right before it came out, which also happened to be Ash Wednesday, so it felt like perfectly fitting to be having this just strained, intense emotional conversation, like ashes and love all tangled up together. And you said, I want you to get a second opinion on this before it goes out. And I said, okay. So I emailed his mother, my grandmother, and she emailed me back 2 hours later and said, we all have regrets. We all have things that we've done that we wish we hadn't. So I see joy ahead for all. So that was her moment of reconciliation prior to this. And we haven't quite achieved it, my dad and I. My grandma believes so here's to the grandmothers. My father's anger is hereditary, handed down from men who worked long hours in the dry heat of the family date ranch, pushing their bodies to exhaustion as they wrestled irrigation pipes at midnight and beheaded rattlesnakes, coached and relentlessly cheered on baseball games, packed picnics up the canyon in the back of pickup trucks, threw their children against walls, and grew into benign and genial grandfathers, pinching our cheeks when they were confined to wheelchairs, although I'm among the descendants who never forgot what they were capable of. One of my uncles told me recently, over pecan pie, that the first time he met my father was when he was invited over to our trailer in the desert for dinner. He watched my father throw my little sister into the couch because she did not finish the food on her plate. A story I had never heard before and didn't remember. But why had my uncle waited so long to tell it? Why hadn't he tried to protect us when we were too small to protect ourselves? Harm that comes through the hands of those we love must be wrestled with. It does not simply disappear. No one mentioned my father's anger as a concern when we were appointed as missionaries, though it welled up in him when the seedling trees he gave to Haitian farmers withered and died in the worst drought in 17 years. As Haitian friends died of preventable diseases and the political situation exploded around us, my father toppled tables, shattering candlesticks and carved wooden statues. His powerlessness erupted into rage, and then repentance. He wept into his hands, and his anger went dormant until the next inciting incident. When I first started writing about our years as missionaries, my father's journals, a gift I can never repay, were my first glimpse into his hidden vulnerabilities. I was struck by his honesty on the page, and I admired him. He didn't care about being portrayed as the hero or the villain. He wanted me to tell the truth about what we'd experienced, about despair, about trees and why they matter. My newfound respect for my father pushed aside my old hurt and fear. Indeed, I believed that by having listened to his grief, my father's anger might finally have been put to rest. I wanted to believe that I had been sent, like a missionary, to help him, that I could lead him home. I was blissfully oblivious to my own condescension. My father's patience after my sons were born was extraordinary. They could scream, and he'd never stop rocking them until they finally fell asleep, safe in his calloused hands. He was patient with infants, just as he was patient with tender roots and buds. I was the one who lost my temper and was quick to shout, who just wanted to escape the demands of motherhood. Once, stuck at home with 2 fractious toddlers, the youngest one worked himself into a red-faced panic, and I was ready to start screaming myself. But instead, I called my parents and put the phone against my son's ear. I listened as they told him about the full moon, about the seeds that my father was sorting at the dining room table. Within minutes, my little boy was fast asleep, his breathing soft and even, his face peaceful. I picked up the phone and told my father that he'd managed to soothe his grandson to sleep. The next morning, he emailed, "When you said he was asleep, I was overtaken by something very deep. I had to go lie on the floor in front of the wood stove for a while. It brings tears to my eyes just writing about it. We should be home if you need to call again. Love, Dad." My father's anger made me what I am. My father's gentleness in that moment protected me from myself. My grandmother assured me that he had been equally patient with me when I was a baby. Grandma Lois had taken a bus up from the California desert all the way to Oregon to see how red my hair really was. She slept on the couch as my father walked the floor with me at midnight, singing to quiet my fears. Does my body still carry the memory of that tenderness, just as it carries the imprint of his rage? As my sons grew older, we began to see glimpses of his old, unpredictable wildness reawakened. Grandpa Johnny wins the Worst Dad of the Year award, my oldest son told me after I'd left the boys alone with my parents while I disappeared to write. My oldest son is like me in intensity. He loses himself in his work, sobs over books, and is righteously indignant at perceived injustices. When my father came to collect seeds in our woods, my boys tagged along, but my father thought that the 6-year-old was walking too fast, so he reached out his foot and tripped him, and my son fell hard on the gravel, breaking open his hands and knees. "Grandpa tripped me," he wailed, his voice raw with betrayal. My father laughed uncomfortably, but didn't exactly apologize. He protects birds' nests and seedling trees. He is capable of gentleness. At the boys' insistence, we wrote up a list of rules for Grandpa to follow. No calling us sissy, no pinching, no sneaking up on us, no wrestling unless you ask us first and we say yes. Reasonable rules, rules I wished my sisters and I had insisted on when we were kids. My father promised to comply. I wanted to convince myself that the problem had been solved. When my mother invited the boys down for 5 days on the farm, we called every night. My father was helping them build a raft out of scrap wood to float down Muddy Creek, and their voices were full of excitement when they described how the water swirled over their ankles. It seemed to be going so well. Until 4 days in, our youngest son hid in the office with the phone pressed against his mouth and told us that Grandpa had grabbed his brother and threw him. My mother got on the phone and sounded stricken. Everyone was crying. It had happened 2 days earlier, but the boys had been too scared to tell us. I told them to pack their things and I'd drive down immediately to come get them, but when my father got on the phone, he assured me that I was overreacting. Your boys are too soft. They need toughening up. I realized with a start that I had spent my entire childhood believing this to be true, a mistaken certainty passed down to me by my ancestors, but one that I didn't have to keep passing on to my sons. On the drive home, the boys and I bought cherry juice and goat cheese and avocados, beauty that we could put into our bodies. And I explained to them what no one had ever explained to me. It is not your fault. You're a kid. You get to make mistakes. Grown-ups are not allowed to hurt you. Grandpa didn't want to hurt me when I was a kid. He doesn't want to hurt you. He really does love us. But anger entered him like a poison through the hands of those he loved, and his heart was broken. And it's my job, not yours, to protect you. Thank you.